Godzilla and video games. Match made in heaven, right? Well, today, we'll look at the history of Godzilla games, their critical reception, and just how they did. I won't be covering every Godzilla game, just the ones that I feel are important to understand the history of Godzilla games. Also, I did not play any of these games, I just want to talk about them. So yeah, fair warning there. And also spoilers. So before we get into it, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. But without further ado, let's talk about Godzilla games. Of course, what better way to start than the first ever Godzilla home console video game, which was released in 1983 and simply titled Godzilla. There's very little info on the game. In fact, I couldn't even find a copy of the game online. That's legal. It's a strategy game. In the game, you play as the military trying to stop Godzilla from destroying Tokyo, whilst minimizing the casualties. The gameplay of the game was pretty simple and rudimentary, which is expected for a game released in the early 80s. The game is grid-based, with one of the grids being Godzilla. Godzilla moves closer as you try to stop him. This white dot is Tokyo, which is your main objective to protect. If Godzilla reaches Tokyo, that's game over. Your weapons are composed of land, sea, air, missile, and one other weapon that I will talk about later, in order to damage Godzilla. The game was developed by Glenn Fisher and published by the Codeworks. One notable part of the game is you can use the atomic bomb. The bomb does major damage to Godzilla, but radiates his surrounding blocks. And that's basically the game. The only review I could find for the game was 2 5-star reviews on a pirate site. So, it's probably decent. It's a simple but important game for being the first ever of a game, and setting the base for Godzilla games to come. The next game I want to talk about is the third Godzilla game released, Godzilla and the Martians. I want to talk about this game because of how weird it is. Released in 1984 on the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, developed by Neil Schrader of Temptation Software Ltd., Godzilla and Martians is about Martians invading the Earth and terraforming it for their own use. The aliens have kidnapped your girl, and you play as a man trying to save them. For the moment, though, she is safe as she's being protected by the friendly dinosaur. Yeah, this game has basically nothing to do with Godzilla. He just stands there, menacingly. But yeah, he's not even talking about Godzilla. He's the friendly dinosaur. That's it. That's all he does in the game. The gameplay is basically a ripoff of Donkey Kong. The player plays as the man trying to rescue his girl while she needs to jump over Martians and traps. You have an oxygen meter, and when it runs out, you lose. You gain points when you finish a level, climb a ladder, or on how much oxygen you have left. The goal of the game is to win as much points as possible. So far, every review I could find of this game calls it complete trash, so... Also, this game is advertised as being for superhumans only. So, just a warning if anyone wants to play, You gotta be, radiated. Pretty bad game, but it's interesting to talk about. We're going to take a time jump to 1988. The NES has been released, and Toho wants to make a game for their big monster. The game was first released in 1988 in Japan and 1989 in North America. The game was published by Toho and developed by Compile. They're the guys mainly known for making Puyo Puyo. The story of the game is one similar to many Godzilla movies. Planet X has suddenly appeared in the year 20XXX. Their inhabitants, the Zillions, have begun to invade the solar system. In order to save the solar system, Godzilla and Mothra team up to combat the invaders and their monsters. The gameplay of the game features 2 playable characters, Godzilla and Mothra. The player chooses the level they want to play on this hexagon-shaped map. When you enter the level, the game is a side-scroller, with varying environments from jungles to outer space. The player uses their attacks to combat enemies and the environment whilst dodging obstacles and enemies. The game is notable for featuring tons of Godzilla monsters, like Ghidorah and King Ghidorah, just to name a few. The game ends with Godzilla and Mothra defeating the invaders to their rest, but Planet X gives a menacing message of how they will return. Most reviews say that the game is at least okay, so if you're interested, give it a shot to learn about this important piece of Godzilla history. Furthermore, the game is actually well known for having a pretty decent soundtrack. It was composed by Masatomo Miyamoto, and for an NES game, it's pretty good. But of course, this game is remembered today because of the creepypasta. This game has a creepypasta all around it, and it's called NES Godzilla Creepypasta. The creepypasta is about a haunted copy of the game with an entity inside called Red. The creepypasta even had a fan game of a playable demo. Godzilla, Monster of Monsters is a decent Godzilla game, but will live on forever in the nightmares of internet dwellers. The NES, one of the best video game consoles of all time, with classics like Super Mario and The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past. But we're here to talk about Godzilla, and the main Godzilla game on the SNES is Super Godzilla, released in 1992. The game was published by Toho and developed by Advanced Communication Company. The story of the game is about aliens in the year 1990X invading Earth. Thus, in order to defend the planet, the military developed a device called the Super X-2 in order to control the kaijus. Godzilla goes through several levels, which all culminate in a final boss battle. Godzilla defeats monster after monster until the aliens unleash their ultimate weapon, Bagan. Yes, the Bagan, the one whose movies always get cancelled. He's here in his full glory. In order to defeat Bagan, the humans take some of his power and give it to Godzilla, and transform him into Super Godzilla, who's actually a big inspiration for the design of Space Godzilla later on. Godzilla then defeats Bagan and the rest of the invaders. Godzilla then changes back to his normal state and returns to the ocean, with the humans noting that even though he saved them, Godzilla may return to threaten them in the future. The gameplay consists of you, the player, controlling Godzilla, who is the only playable kaiju this time around, and fighting a multitude of his classic villains like King Ghidorah, Biollante, and Mechagodzilla. The game is split into two screens, where one shows the action and the other information needed, like the monster's energy and attack. The bottom screen also switches to show text when there's a cutscene and the map when he is out of battle. Basically, the game works like this. The player first guides Godzilla through the map, making sure he doesn't crash into anything. Each level is timed, too, to add some extra pressure to the player. Whilst walking around, the player can pick up 4 orbs to help fight in battle. Occasionally, when walking around, the player will encounter a UFO in order to fight them. The combat of the game works by using Godzilla's 4 attacks: Tail Attack, Body Strike / Headbutt, Fire Breath, and the Hyper Fire Breath attack. All the moves require Fighting Spirit, which is sort of like a mana bar for your attacks, so you can't just spam the really strong ones all the time. When you press down on the control pad, you can also go into defensive stance, which greatly increases your defense but drastically lowers your fighting spirit. Then, after Godzilla defeats the UFO, he goes back to the level to look for his main target. He will find the final boss in these purple circles over the map, called Monster Points, and once he steps on it, he will enter the battle against the monster. The battles work the same way as they did before, just harder and with different mechanics. Like for example, Mechagodzilla, the fire breath doesn't work against him. The game also has these really cool animated cutscenes in the fight, which is look amazing, even for today. The soundtrack was composed by Michiharu Hasuya and Junko Yokama. It features a variety of classic returning tracks and original songs, which are all great. The quick reception of the game was not so good. People liked the story and graphics, but thought the AI was unfairly strong, and the game not having a password system just did not help alleviate the game's difficulty. And it wasn't just, Dark Souls hard. I mean, these guys cheated hard. Also, people didn't like how so much of the game was spent on a map that moves extremely slowly, and when you dig into fights, they were constantly interrupted by these animations. However, if you're a hardcore Godzilla fan, you'll probably enjoy something, seeing all these monsters and references to the series. Fun fact, the Mechagodzilla in the Japanese version is the Heisei one, but because of popularity in North America, we got the Showa one instead. Honestly, I think this game would work way better as a turn-based RPG. Instead of having to actually manually fight, you just click a move and you get these cutscenes. I think that would work way better, Ultimately, Super Godzilla was the main Godzilla game for the SNES, and while having many cool aspects, it failed at being a good game, but still has some enjoyability for hardcore fans of the series. Let's jump another console generation to the Sega Saturn, one of the first consoles to have 3D graphics, and Godzilla's first forgery into 3D with the game Godzilla Retoshinkan / Godzilla Arpeggio Shock. The game was notable for being both developed and published by Sega themselves. Arpeggio Shock, like the original Godzilla game, is about you, the player, controlling the Japanese self-defense force and trying to stop several different kaijus, from Anguirus to the main lizard himself, Godzilla. The player directs tanks and other military equipment towards the monsters on a 3D isometric map, whilst the monsters destroy cities. The player keeps attacking the monsters until either their HP or the monster's HP depletes first. You can also play as Godzilla and Magura to try and stop the monsters. Yeah, this game is heavily inspired by the Heisei era, which makes sense because at least in 1995, the year Wish to Destroy came out. The reception of the game from what I can find online is mostly negative, just calling the game kinda boring. One thing to note is how unknown this game is. There's very little info to talk about this game, which is pretty interesting. It's like one of the most obscure Godzilla games. Probably because it only released in Japan, too. It was on the Sega Saturn, so I mean, who cared about the Sega Saturn? It's in Japan, it's not very good. Duh, of course no one knows about this game. Aside from that, there isn't much else very notable about the game. I just want to talk about it because of how technically it's his first 3D home console game. So that's pretty neat. The next game I want to talk about is our first computer game, Godzilla Online. Released in 1998 for computers, it was a tie-in game for the 1998 movie, and even releasing the same day, which is the first time a computer game based on a major Hollywood movie released the same day. It was developed by Mythic Entertainment. One notable detail about the game is that its graphics were rendered using voxels, which is like a 3D cube used to render graphics. Think games like Minecraft or obviously Voxlands. The game takes place very soon after the events of the film. New York has gone under attack from Baby Zillas. Actually, it's Baby Godzilla. Shut up. Okay, no one cares. They're Zillas. They're not Godzilla. There's no real story of the game, just the premise and the gameplay. So think of like, Black Ops 4 with no story mode, just the multiplayer modes. There are 4 roles the player can assume in the game. First, the soldier, who hunts the Baby Zillas with their military equipment. Next is the scientist role, who extracts blood from the Baby Zillas while defending himself with some sciencey weapons, which can stun and do damage. Next is Baby Zillas, who start out as fresh hatchlings. Hatchlings. It's a very hard word to say. Hatchlings. They can eat these colored fish to grow bigger and stronger. Their arsenal is composed of physical attacks like bites, but also projectile breath attack, which is a corrosive steam. The final class is Reporter, who's our first non-aggressive class, and they can't fight. Instead, their job is to get footage of the conflict between the other classes, while trying to stay alive. The footage actually plays a role in the game because it can be seen by the other players who receive info on the match. The game features 5 game modes. First is Free For All. In this game mode, you have a set amount of kills to get, and whoever gets there first wins. Then is Team Deathmatch, the same concept as Free For All, except players are either in the blue or yellow team. Fun fact, Zillas and humans can be on the same team if the match's creator chooses it. Thirdly, we have Egg Statica. Players are split into teams of blue and yellow, looking for randomly placed Zilla eggs. After finding them, they bring it back to their base and defend it from the other team, who will try to steal it. The first team to have all the eggs wins. Next, you have Escape from New York City. This game is about baby Zillas trying to escape and eating fish to evolve. The humans try to kill the Zillas and stop them from evolving/escaping. The game is over once enough Zillas escape or are killed. The last game mode is fittingly called Last Man. Players are given 2 minutes to join once the match starts. Once the time is up, no new players can enter the arena and the match clenches. Inside the arena, each player has 2 lives, and once they have been depleted, the player is out. The last one standing wins. Each of these game modes takes place on these maps. The first 3 were all based on iconic New York City landmarks like Madison Square Garden, Fulton Fish Market, and 23rd Street Subway Station. After launch, 2 new maps were added, which are the Manhattan Museum of Art and Wall Street. Here's some cool info. The game was actually shown off at E3 1998, and Dean Devlin, the producer and co-writer for the 98 film, was directly involved in the project. To promote the game and movie, TriStar partnered with Taco Bell of all places to distribute 500,000 CD-ROMs. The ROMs included Godzilla historical info, movie stills, and of course, the game. They also partnered with Duracell to produce 8,000 Godzilla standing displays that come with coupons that will redeem 2 free months of GameStorm subscriptions for new members, which is the site you would go if you wanted to play the game. The critical reception of the game was, as you'd expect, mostly negative. A lot of the reviews call it a cheap, bad Diablo knockoff, so yeah. Unfortunately, the game isn't online, so you can't play it. Whilst America was busy off making Godzilla Online in 1998, Japan was making another Godzilla game called Godzilla Generations. The game was developed by General Entertainment and published by Sega for the Dreamcast. It also received a sequel a year later in 1999 called Godzilla Generations Maximum Impact. Godzilla Generations especially launched later for the Dreamcast and is shown off at the Tokyo Game Show 98 Autumn, where it was incredibly hyped. Godzilla and gaming fans in general were stoked to finally play a Godzilla game where you are the kaiju and go around destroying buildings. However, when people played the game, the hype died very quickly. But we'll get to that later. Godzilla Generations is an action game where the player takes control of many fan-favorite kaijus like Godzilla, Manila, 1988 Godzilla, and Giant Dr. Serizawa? Yes, out of all the monsters in Toho's classic catalog, they chose a giant version of Dr. Serizawa. What's even funnier is that he has laser eyes, and when he heals, he literally just prays to God. What were they on when they made this game? Okay, so the playable characters are a bit odd, but how's the gameplay? Once the player chooses a character, which at the start only Godzilla and Mechagodzilla can be selected, they then choose which of the 5 cities they want to play. For the cities, we have first Fukuoka, the starting level, Osaka, Nagoya, Yokohama, and last but not least, Tokyo. Each city is made up of 2 levels, except Tokyo, which is 3. Your goal is to completely destroy the city within the time limit in order to progress to the next level. And when I say completely destroy, I mean completely destroy. You destroy everything from the giant skyscrapers to measly trees. You can do this by stomping around, using physical attacks like a tail swipe or projectile attacks like your fire and atomic breath. You also have some defensive options like a block and a self-heal. Now, you may be wondering, why would you need defensive options? Well, it's because the Japanese self-defense force is here to stop you. They will try to stop you using their 11 vehicles throughout the stages. Their vehicles split into 2 categories, flying and ground. Their flying vehicles include the Super X-123, Mitsubishi F-15J, and the AH-1S Cobra. The ground vehicles include the MBT MB92, MBAW-93, CLT-95, and MBAW-93. The game is split into 4 modes. Firstly, we have normal mode, where the player has to destroy everything in the 11 stages as quickly as possible. Then, we have time attack, where the player tries to destroy as much as possible in a limited amount of time. Thirdly, we have collected Coliseum. What's interesting about this game mode is that you can't directly access it in the game. Through a visual memory unit that was sold separately from the game, because of course it was, players could receive 43 really cute looking versions of these several iconic monsters and battle each other out in a Coliseum. The great thing about these monsters is that we got so many, from legends like Mothra and Rodan to Sonora and Deborah. I don't even know. Lastly, yet this even counts as a game mode, is Generations Theater, which just shows clips and trailers in several Godzilla movies throughout the Big G's history. Here's some fun facts. In the game, Mechagodzilla has the Heisei Mechagodzilla roar, despite it looking like a show of Mechagodzilla. Likewise, Manila has Baby Godzilla's roar. Also, the winning map looks like boxer shorts. Despite all this, the game failed critically. Eastern publications like Famitsu gave it a very mediocre score of 20 out of 40, but Western publications weren't as nice. GameSpot gave the game a 3.2 out of 10 because it was, quote, terrible and one of the worst games in 1998. The reason stated were the monsters were incredibly slow. Also, since the monsters can heal, there's no fear of death, and completely destroys the challenge. Edge, what a funny name, gave the game a 4 out of 10 and criticized it for its poor graphics, horrible controls, and wonky camera. Computer and Video Games gave it a 1 out of 10 because of its tedious gameplay and the terrible camera and controls. The game reportedly sold around 22,000 copies, so that's extremely low. Overall, despite the hype for the game, Godzilla Generations was a disappointing game, but laid out the groundwork for many Godzilla games to come. Look, so originally I was going to talk about way more Godzilla games in this video, but I didn't want to see like an hour long, and the games that we were going to talk about were handheld Godzilla games, the Pipework Trilogy, and Godzilla PS4. But all of those topics are so big and important that I want to do them justice, okay? So I'm going to make one video about Godzilla handheld games, one video about the Pipework Trilogy, and one video about Godzilla PS4. So, what did we learn in class in this video? That's right, Godzilla games are weird, but hey, one of the most interesting parts of the franchise.